I wanted to ask you a question about feeling responsible for the world, a feeling of responsibility for children, suffering, war, climate, etc. Many levels. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with children, a lot of trauma. But I'm also here because I feel that there's a need for some quite big shift, letting go, and I'm interested in. Yes, I mean the teaching that you're giving feels resonant to me, but I'm just asking a question about what's going on
Yes.
and what might be relevant.
Well, Mark, the suffering that you feel is impersonal suffering, by which I mean it's not suffering that arises on behalf of anything personal in you. On the contrary, it's to the degree that you are, to the degree that our mind is free of personal emotions, to that extent we are able to feel another's suffering as our own. So when you feel the suffering of the world, the suffering of others, it's not egoic suffering. On the contrary, it's as a result of the diminishing of the ego that you feel another's suffering as your own. That's what compassion is, to feel another's feeling as if it were your own, because it is really your own. You are the same being as they are. So don't think that your suffering is in any way a personal thing or an egoic thing. As regards the responsibility you feel, yes, we all have a sacred responsibility to share this understanding in one way or another. At one end of the extreme, that could express itself just, it could have no outward expression, it could just be silence. That would be one end of the extreme. At the other end of the extreme, we could be very active out in the world, doing something very specifically related to sharing this understanding, or there are all sorts of possibilities in between. Your work as a therapist, for instance, with children, would be one such way of sharing this understanding with them. Do you just work with children, or?
Well, adults and families.
So that's your way, or one of the ways you bring this understanding to individuals or groups. There are other ways, artists, politicians. What I'm doing is just one such way. And yes, I do think we all have it's really inevitable, to the extent that we feel another's being as our own being. If they suffer, we suffer, and just for exactly the same reason that our own personal suffering, we seek to alleviate it. So we would seek to alleviate another's suffering whenever we are confronted with it and whenever we feel we're able to do something directly about it. But it shouldn't come from guilt. That would be a little egoic element that was creeping in. But I don't get the impression that that's a very strong element in your case. It should come from, as I'm sure it does in you, the feeling that when another suffers, you suffer. If one of your children come to you, they're traumatized at home and they're suffering, you feel it as if you were suffering. You are suffering. And you, in your work with them, you tailor this understanding to their understanding. So you don't talk to them about the direct path or the pathless path. You talk more specific, more relatively, more progressively with them. But nevertheless, you're still expressing this understanding and sharing it. Now, other people, politicians, and they're sharing it or artists in other ways. And sometimes with larger groups of people, but whether we speak to one person or thousands of people, that's that doesn't really matter. It just depends what we're destined to do. It's not better to speak to many people than to speak to a few people. Well, what is important is that we find a way of expressing this understanding in a way that is an extension of our own character, that uses our own particular skills and tendencies, and it sounds as if you're doing that.
I think I am, but I'm also, there is a sense of being debilitated by the amount of suffering. There's a sense of being almost unable to move with the suffering, there's a lack of freedom in some sense.
Well, then, if you feel debilitated by the suffering, it has temporarily taken you over. You have to take yourself back to that place in yourself that is inherently free of suffering. Because it's only when you're speaking or acting from that place that you're really helping others to be free of their suffering. So if you find you're overwhelmed by the suffering sometimes and cannot speak or act as a result of it, then pause, close your eyes, turn away from the content of your experience, access that place in yourself that is inherently free of suffering. Make touch with that, go back there, make touch with that, and then re-engage with the person or the activity, informed by this felt sense of your own peace and freedom. And you know how to go back there. You know how to find your way back there. It may take a little bit of time when you're feeling overwhelmed. But when you're feeling overwhelmed with the suffering, that's not a good place to act from. That's where everybody else is acting from. You don't want to contribute to that. You want to bring a new perspective. And in order to bring that new perspective, you have to be coming from that new perspective, from that place in yourself that is free of suffering.